Hey there everybody, how's it going? Have you ever been foraging? I don't know about you, but I find great joy in going outside, picking something from a tree, eating it, and not dying. But when it comes to foraging, there are a lot of things that you need to know so that you don't mess up on the last step and poison yourself. And since I would consider myself an avid outdoorsman who spends most of his time inside on Wikipedia, I'm going to tell you guys about how to forage things correctly. So for those of you who don't know what foraging is, it's basically the art of going outside and finding food that won't kill you. There are all sorts of things you can forage, like plants, fruits, nuts, mushrooms, and shellfish. But we're mainly going to be talking about plants, nuts, and berries because I dislike the taste of mushrooms, and the closest shellfish I can find is at Myers in the seafood aisle. Now when it comes to foraging plants, nuts, and berries, there are a lot of things that you need to watch out for. Like if what you're foraging is poisonous, or if it's inedible, or if it is edible but it just tastes really gross, or if it has ants on it. One thing foraging has taught me is that Earth is a very nice planet with a lot of beautiful plants, nuts, and berries on it, but a lot of those plants, nuts, and berries want to kill you or make you feel extreme discomfort, and you need to figure out which plants, nuts, and berries don't want to do that and when to identify those so you can eat them. One way of doing this, in the case of berries, is paying attention to the features of the berries using your senses. If a berry has thorns on the plant, milky sap, a bitter smell, or is white, yellow, or green, chances are that it's most likely not good for eating. There can be some exceptions though, because I've eaten wild blackberries all the time, and those have thorns on them, and I'm still alive. But overall, as a general rule, I would stay away from plants with those features. As well as using your senses, it's never a bad idea to carry a book about this kind of stuff on you, just in case you get lost in the woods or just feel like eating stuff there and don't want to die due to poison, because it turns out a lot of not edible things look like things that are edible, and only a book can really help you tell the details so you can tell them apart. Another less traditional way to tell if a plant is poisonous or not is to bring along a test subject to try the plants before you eat them. Can you eat this? Not edible. Overall, a good tip though is just not to eat something if you don't know exactly what it is. Another thing you need to figure out when foraging is where you plan to forage. There are all sorts of areas that are good for foraging, like swamps, forests, beaches, plains, and backyards, all of which you can find delicious food in. Although I will say, if you do plan to forage in a backyard, make sure that the backyard is not sprayed with chemicals before you begin eating from it. Oh my goodness, is that a girlfriend, a private plane, and $300 in cash? Overall, I forage mostly in forests and backyards, and I've found a decent amount of good tasting foods that I would like to share with you guys, in case you guys want to go outside and try it yourself. My favorite plant to forage is this plant called wood sorrel, which is apparently very popular in England. It's basically a clover that gets yellow flowers and tastes like an orange. The great thing about this plant is that it grows everywhere in my neighborhood and no one else really thinks to eat it, which in the grand scheme of things is both good or bad for me because it kind of makes me look strange when I'm in a neighbor's yard eating it. 911? He's in the yard again. Another thing I eat a lot is a berry called a mulberry. If I were to best describe it, it looks a lot like a really small blackberry and it grows on a really tall tree, but it also tastes really good. I can't really describe the flavor, but it does taste good. One thing though is that this plant does stain a lot of stuff, and it looks like you have a really bad rash whenever you finish eating them. As well as also staining your skin purple, it stains everything you touch purple after you finish eating them, whether that be the couch, the wall, or your dog. But putting all that aside, it's a very good tasting berry. Crab apples are also good. Despite the name, it's not an apple that tastes like a crab, or looks like a crab, or really has anything to do with a crab. It's basically just a really small apple, but it tastes good and it's really good for throwing at stuff. Lastly, one of my favorite berries is called a wild blackberry, which is basically just a really small blackberry. The only thing about this berry though is that it grows on a thorny plant, so in trying to eat it you might end up with some battle scars, but it still tastes really good and it's worth the minor injuries. And that's all for foraging. There's a bunch of stuff that I didn't touch on, like how I wouldn't eat any berry that looks similar to a blueberry or a cranberry if I don't know if it's a blueberry or a cranberry, but there are all sorts of good Wikipedia articles and books on foraging that I would recommend you look at if you do plan to forage. Anyway, bye bye!